All right. Good evening, everybody, as we welcome everyone into the live stream here on One Soccer, a special live stream. Andi Petrillo, Kristian Jack, Gareth Wheeler, all over Platt. And why are we joining you? Well, you already know the big news, of course, is John Herdman no longer the head coach of the Canadian men's national team. He will officially take the reins of MLS side Toronto FC on October 1st. There's a lot to dive into here, gentlemen, because for the first time ever, John Herdman is also entering the pro game, the day in and day out of what that's all about versus what we've known him as, which is the national team coach for the women for the longest time, taking over there in 2012 and what he was able to do with the women's program. And then, of course, the men's program since 2018 and what he's been able to do there. KJ, I'll start with you and just your reaction to this news.
Yeah, great to be on with everybody. My reaction is one of I'm certainly not surprised. One, I think, of expectation that this is going to happen for some time. Those of us who are fortunate to cover the sport in this country have been hearing this for some weeks, and it's just a matter of time before it got done. So that's my reaction to it. And look, we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about the reasons behind a lot of this. But I just think it's time. That my reaction is it's time. It's time for both. It's funny because we're talking about a men's national team manager leaving after a tremendous legacy of a few years of what he's done. And we're also talking about, because of where he's going, it's also a Canadian soccer story. So we're looking at both angles here. But from the Canadian men's national team, I think it's time. And it's strange to me to see some things written today in terms of it being a hammer blow and linking it to dysfunction in Canada soccer. And sometimes, guys, it's just, as I said, it's just time. The natural cycle of football management is there. And, we're going to get into a lot of reasons why that's the case. But it's been there since 2018. It's a long time. And I think there's very possible here in this world of negativity that we live in Canada soccer that this might be just really good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ollie, and we'll dive into that because Herdman obviously is the only one who can really answer that question, because the bottom line is we do know that he's clearly wanted out for some time. The New Zealand job, that would have been another national job. And then now this one here. Why, though? Again, that's something he could probably only answer. Is it because of what's going on with Canada soccer, or is it because it was time? He's been with the organization, as I mentioned, with the women and taking them to the Olympics in 2012. Ollie, what was your reaction?
Yeah, similar thoughts to KJ, really, in the sense that I wasn't surprised at this point. And I kind of, again, to echo KJ's point about, it being whether it really is a blow to Canada soccer, to the men's national team or not. I kind of don't feel that way at this point. And that's not because I don't rate John Herdman as a coach. I just kind of feel like it had been building, and that in some senses he was already gone, it felt like. When you look back through the events of this year, and we've talked about this plenty of times on our shows, the New Zealand links, to the comments he made over the summer, to now this Toronto FC job and the interest that he seemed to very clearly show in that, it just felt that it had come to a point now, for whatever the reasons are, and we'll get into it, that John Herdman's heart wasn't really in it anymore, and he didn't seem convinced by the prospects of going forwards for another 3 years here to get to the World Cup, which is a very long period of time in football. So, when that's the case, I was kind of already at the point where I was anticipating this and expecting it to come. And so now it's about moving forwards, really. I don't feel devastated by the news today. And again, that's not a reflection of what I think of John Herdman as a coach. It's more of a reflection that I felt like this had been building to this point. Now we've got there. We've got to confront it, obviously, as a country, and move forward with what is the biggest coaching hire the men's national team has ever had leading into 2026. And there are going to be a lot of challenges that come with that, and they've got to get that right. But I would also like to think that we can approach it with a sense of optimism about where this team is, the opportunities that are in front of it, and what we can do from here.
Unfortunately, that's not the way that it's being portrayed, or I think the masses, people outside of Canadian soccer, will view this, because full credit to John. He turned around a program that over the course of my lifetime, it only played in one World Cup ever. For the first time since 1986, he put a group of players together and instilled belief in them that something better could be accomplished. He did that to the country as well. And full credit to him. He made this country believe. And so the players played a part in that, but John's organization has certainly played a part. But if we're going to be honest, this last year, 13, 14 months has been a mess, a disaster. And John has played a part in that. Calling out the association, no matter what you actually think of them, doesn't look great. The pursuit of the New Zealand job, which was public and reported from a New Zealand perspective, much more in depth than it was in this country. If you're a committed national team head coach, you shouldn't be doing that. This TFC pursuit, when job opportunities were reported last summer in the league championship, it seemed like he was realistically contemplating making a move at that time ahead of competing in the 2022 World Cup. And what needs to be said is that when a head coach is hired by an association, he works for the association and not necessarily with the players, and not wearing sponsorship at certain events and being part of a climate which has been exceptionally negative. And look, there's fights that should be had. I'm of the impression that a lot of these should be taking place behind closed doors. There was an animosity that grew. And I think a lot of that, because of his relevance and his power over the program, emanates from the head coach as well. And nothing was done to quell the storm. There was multiple issues on multiple fronts that I think started off the field, but then started to play out on the field as well. So altogether, it's a disappointing way for me for this to all end. But I do think that it's probably a win-win scenario for both sides. From John Herdman's perspective, a chance to do what he does best. And he's phenomenal at this. He's a cultural builder. He can help rebuild Toronto FC in a way that few, have tried and simply haven't been able to. I think that Herdman is well positioned to do that based upon what he brings to the table. And for Canada Soccer, if your manager's out looking for another job and you don't want to let that person go based upon financial reasons, you give them the runway to go find another job and leave on amicable terms that will inevitably not cost the Canadian Soccer Association financially. And people that I talked to today said that this will actually help the Canadian soccer finances. The biggest liability financially that Canada Soccer has had over recent years is paying the contract of John Herdman. So this could open up a door. And finally, it's just better to make this move now when we're a long way out from the World Cup, rather than this playing out next summer or the summer after that. And it's not just in terms of preparation, it's all the nonsense that's come along with this disgruntlement, just the animosity that's built throughout the association. And it's time to start fresh and look forward and build around a fantastic group of young players, and look forward to hosting a home World Cup and prepare as best as possible.
Yeah, we have a lot to dive into, because now we have to find a new coach for Canada. And then obviously, what do we think John Herdman can do at Toronto FC? And quite honestly, with TFC, and we can stick with the national team first, but with TFC, I am curious though, guys, where the money is going to come from. This is an organization that still is paying out a coach that they recently fired, and an organization that has spent to the max with the two Italian players. I'm not quite sure the limited pot is going to be there with Toronto FC, the way people are also making it seem like, oh, well, he left Canada Soccer because he wasn't able to get the money or the resources for a program. I don't think Toronto FC has that much at their disposal yet either. But let's maybe talk, if you want to start with TFC first, what kind of situation here, KJ, do you think awaits him? Because we all agree he is a great motivator. He is somebody who can come on in and lift the spirits of players, find a way to have them come together and do great things. But like I said, he's going to have two big personalities in the Italians that he's going to have to work around. This is a team that's dead last. If I don't know, I haven't checked the table mathematically, though. I would assume they're out. So there's a lot of work that he needs to do there for sure. But what really do you think the situation in reality is for Herdman with TFC?
Well, I think you make some great points, Andy. I think, first of all, financially, both sides, the way it's been reported of Canada Soccer and the way it's been reported with TFC is probably inaccurate on both sides. As you alluded to, TFC are not suddenly going to throw a boatload of cash at John Herdman and go, here you go, here's a blank check, you can go sign whoever you want. And I think it's very important to stress that, in my opinion, and talking to a lot of people, including a lot of players, that a lot of people don't feel like John Herdman is leaving Canada Soccer because of financial constraints. Okay, as I said, it's football, it's time. And there's some more financial constraint stories out there than actual stories around relationships. And, in football, relationships sour. And that's just what happens. Players, and this is a great thing we all love about them, can be very selfish. What can you do for me? That's the job of a coach. You're not there to manage. You're there to coach them. How do you make them better? And fundamentally, Gareth talked about it. Since they qualified for Qatar, the record has not been good. 7 wins out of 17, disappointment in the World Cup for me. But look, he did a job. The honeymoon period, he got everyone to believe into it, and that will help him at Toronto FC. There's different phases of management. The first phase, he got it bang on. The second phase, the mission phase. Let's get to Qatar. He got it bang on. He got everyone to believe. The third phase, Qatar, failure. The fourth phase, coming out of Qatar, and the next step, Nations League, failure. But that's okay. You can win and lose things. That's football management. So that brings me to Toronto FC. Now, Toronto FC have come to a point of colossal level of incompetence. Okay, it's not even arguably, it's the worst constructed roster in Major League Soccer history, and that's a fact. No one can debate it. You look at how much money they're throwing at these players. It's a joke. It's tearing the fan base apart. It's sad for the country. It's sad for the sport. I mean, apart from if you're a Whitecaps or Montreal fan, but you get my point. It's sad to see that they can't get it right. So he's walking into something again that needs to be built up. So I think if you look at it in phases, again, the honeymoon period. It's interesting. He's starting October 1st, by the way, and not now, because he will not have a losing record over 8 games. He's going to have 3 games. So no matter what happens, and then no one's going to judge him. So that helps. And so then he's got to try and turn this around. But as you alluded to it, and I think it's important that people say that this is a team and an organization that spends so much money that they deserve a winner. And he's got to get this turned around fast. If this time next year they're still out the playoffs and they're still losing as many games as they are right now, I think people will be questioning him already. So I don't think he's going in there expecting this 2-year honeymoon phase. He's got to get it right. And if for some reason Insigne and Bernardeschi are still there, which will be a disaster, but likely, then he's got to get them motivated.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of people commenting here, and you talk about roster construction, and we know that Bill Manning is the one who has a lot of his fingerprints as well over this roster. And now you wonder how much he'll also give to Herdman to be able to say, all right, what can we do here? But let's also not forget, most recently, like there were talks there of Bernardeschi probably leaving and that falling through. So it's not like they haven't tried. Here's the other thing. It's not like they haven't tried. Those are big contracts for other teams to take on. So, I mean, it's very difficult that another MLS team would take those contracts on. So you probably have to look elsewhere. And a lot of times those other, whether it is in Saudi Arabia or in Europe, they don't really take the players with that kind of salary here out of MLS. It's going to be very tough for Toronto FC, but I wonder where you are, Ollie, as well with, what Herdman can actually accomplish with this team. And I guess even from a Bill Manning perspective, he has to get this hire right between, making certain changes that he's made. And now he's, he got rid of Bob Bradley. Now he's brought in Herdman. Like this is another big splashy signing. I mean, Bill's got to get this right for Toronto FC. So a lot is on Herdman's shoulders.
Yeah, I think it's high risk for both of them. For Bill Manning to appoint a coach who hasn't coached in club football before, and for John Herdman to take on this job that I think is fraught with risk. I agree with KJ in the sense that I don't think managers will get that much time. To be honest with you, this idea that you need like 3 years to properly implement a style of player, I think is absolute nonsense. Sure, to achieve your ultimate goal, okay, that's going to take some time and no one's going to be expecting that immediately. But to start playing good football, to start feeling like the team is progressing and has an identity and a direction again, good coaches can achieve that much quicker. And I think that's becoming much more the expectation nowadays in football. And I think it'll be the expectation of John Herdman next season. So it's a really difficult job in a lot of senses. I think the 2 names you mentioned, Andi, Insigne and Bernardeschi, are at the forefront of that. What's the situation with them? Can you make it work with them? I have serious doubts about that, to be honest with you, based on everything I've heard over the past year or so now. Can you find a way to offload one or both of them? How difficult is that going to be? Is it something that is already in motion, and John Herdman is coming into this job knowing that they will be gone, or is there a chance that he's going to have to try to make it work here next season? I think those are really difficult questions about the direction of the team here. What I will say on the other side of the coin, though, is that I also don't agree with the idea that Toronto FC is an unattractive job. I think it's a hugely appealing job for a ton of managers. I think we're a few years removed from this club being one of the biggest in this region, competing for the CONCACAF Champions League, competing against the best Mexican clubs, the most ambitious MLS sides, and that potential is there. And if you can get them back there, you know, you're laughing. You're going to have a very good time of it in this city. So there are two distinct sides to it, and I don't want to diminish the upside that is there for John Herdman in a job like this, taking it on at a low ebb as he did with the men's national team and the women's national team before that. But I do think it is a really difficult task in front of him, and there is probably more risk in terms of his personal reputation attached to this job than there would be continuing to 2026 with Canada.
Well, Herdman's never lost at BMO Field with the men's national team.
That's a
that's a good thing. I think that taking this job, however, is more about John looking for that exit strategy from Canada Soccer rather than the TFC job right now being one of great appeal. Coming out of the World Cup, and even, you know, the comments as of late, he had that link to New Zealand. There was interest there. Where was the other interest elsewhere in John Herdman? What was his market? Beloved in Canada? I don't know. I'm asking that question. I think that John has been looking for quite some time to get out of Canada Soccer. There was clashes behind the scenes with executives that a lot of people have talked about over the times. Again, those public comments about the state of play. KJ mentioned it about the relationship part. This whole idea, and I see it from a lot of people that I respect, this whole financial matter. This wasn't an issue up until this past winter when the budgets were scaled back for both the women's and men's national team. That's because over the course of World Cup qualifying, John, yes, had to go out and raise money and had people to come in, but he was given, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, everyone, just he was given everything that he asked for, basically, in terms of having his team prepared. He had an astronaut who's very expensive that came and stood next to him in the Canadian men's national team in the technical area at the World Cup. They fly charter planes everywhere. They had armed security in Haiti, which then carried on throughout the entire thing. The scouting, the in-depth analysis, the coaching staff. I have no idea what the budget was, but it was like a small army anytime that they show up. That was even after the budgets were cut. Like, it's incredible. I've never experienced anything like that covering Canada Soccer for the last 25 years almost. So look, let's be real. Things were looking very well up until the calendar flipped to 2023. When spending was reeled in, or attempted to be reeled in, then that's when the real pushback happened. And I think that John understood that having that competitive advantage against other countries in this region, not named the United States, not named Mexico, paid off and paid off for them. So it's just not sustainable where we are as a soccer nation right now to go out and compete dollar for dollar economically, financially with the big dogs in this region and beyond. It's just not where we're at. And I don't blame John for trying to push the envelope. I know that he wasn't a fan when Earl Cochran was named general secretary. I know that he wanted more. And man, I love that ambition and I love his desire. But again, these things have to happen behind closed doors, not through media leaks with two reporters who are complete outsiders of the game, reciting the same stories over and over again, trying to throw the entire soccer structure in this country into disrepute. It's just bad form for me. And I just don't like that. So this is a good compromise where there's an amicable split and we can kind of move forward from that. Of course, finances, Canada Soccer has to grow. Everyone is on the exact same page here, but it's how we get there. I think it's very divisive right now.
And this is the thing. This is what we do know. Canada Soccer is struggling with money. Jason DeVos, interim general secretary, has said it. That's a fact. We also know that a huge chunk of their money went to, paying their head coach. So with that being said, so now that Herdman, who is somebody who was putting pressure on Canada Soccer and trying to get them to spend more money and invest, now that he's gone, what is the reality, KJ, that they're going to get a top dog manager? I think, that to me at least is the biggest question. Who are you going to get? What can you afford? And is it, what kind? So if it's somebody who's going to make less than Herdman, will their personality still be big enough to be able to coach bigger personalities in Alphonso Davies and Kyle Larin and Jonathan David and Tajon Buchanan and Richard? Like, this is a star-studded lineup that Canada has. So you need a coach who can match that. And I know the name, and it was even floated around with Toronto FC, KJ. And most recently I heard other people saying, oh, okay, well, since Herdman got the TFC job, does that mean Bobby Smirniotis could be a candidate for the Canada Soccer job? I mean, let's maybe start throwing out names there, because I think we have to look at reality, what you can pay somebody, and then what is the personality of that person to be able to manage really big personalities who are champions themselves in their own leagues, right?
Yeah, look, boy, there's a lot to dissect right there. Yeah. A lot. I'll say this, first of all, the first thought comes to mind is that don't underestimate players. You talk about champions and you talk about finding somebody who can motivate them. You know what else these players are? They're terrific guys. Okay, so these are the same people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but when the world questioned John Herdman coming from the women's game to the men's game, these are the same people that accepted him very quickly and tolerated John Herdman and got behind John Herdman. So I wouldn't start lining up storylines to say that these prima donnas who are playing in all the world-class clubs around the world can't accept coach X, Y, or Z. I just don't think that's going to be part of the storyline here. Okay, there are also players who understand, when I speak to them, that they are still having to work under some demands. I know there's a lot of reports out there about we want more money, we want more of this Canada Soccer. There's a lot of stones being thrown around, as Gareth said, and there's a couple of people who don't care about the sport in this country and haven't reported on a game that want to keep telling the story about it, and everybody just keeps leaking stuff to them. So I know a lot of players who are very frustrated by that. Extremely frustrated about that. So you've got to look for a personality in a manager who isn't doing that, by the way. And I'm not saying that manager was or wasn't doing it, but that's part of keeping things in-house. That's culture. And that's what they want now. They want to see somebody who's got everybody on board and is managing what is the most important thing, outcomes on the field. Football first, and it will take care of everything else. And as I said earlier, this is just football. Okay, yeah. Let's talk about this is a hammer blow for Canada Soccer and a dysfunction in Canadian soccer. It's football. It's okay. He's allowed to go on and coach for Toronto FC. His time is over. Okay, I wanted to throw something out. If we were going to keep John Herdman in Canada, and if Canada were going to keep him until the end of the 2026 World Cup, which is what many people wanted, he would have become one of the top 25 longest tenured international football managers ever. That's how hard the game is. Okay, Didier Deschamps is still there. Why? He's a football legend and he won a major tournament for France. Okay, he's an outlier. Coldo Alvarez, same for Andorra. That's it. You just don't stay in an international management job for that long. So as Ollie and Gareth said, whether it was now, whether it was after the Copa America, it's better earlier than later.
Better now, yeah.
It's better now. And as we've seen, New Zealand, Toronto FC, it's just part of life. It's part of football. Right. Yeah. As I said earlier, this idea that it's a complete crisis and it's a terrible dark day for Canada Soccer, trust us, players are okay with this. Okay. They're okay with this. Many of them are very happy. Many of them are not necessarily too happy, but they're wishing him well, but they're okay. They're football professionals and they're going to be fine no matter who manages them. And to answer your last question about whether it's an attractive job, I'm just little old me. I've never worked as a football coach. I've never worked for a football team. But in the last 3 hours, I've had 3 football managers message me and say, how do I get my resume? Yeah. So, of course, it's you want to manage Bayern Munich, you want to manage a Bayern Munich superstar, Jonathan David, you want to manage Canada going into a World Cup. It's an incredible job, Gareth. Incredible.
KJ, same thing. Like, once this broke this afternoon, part of me, I just got back from vacation. I've just tried to get on the phone with as many people as I can, and people's phones have been blowing up just in terms of looking into this job. And John Herdman got a raise last summer. and which bumped up his salary considerably, plus a bonus for qualifying for the World Cup. And that wasn't an insignificant number. That number could go a long way to doing other things. This is a job that I'm sure of it, some substantial names worldwide will be right on after. But first things first, KJ, all eyes now turn to Canada Soccer. I'm with you. It's not a disaster. It's going to be a big change from Herdman to who's ever next. But this is a chance for the board of directors. The board is at turnover. Basically, every person in C-suite, within Canada Soccer is gone. The general secretary is gone. Everyone's good. Like, everyone is gone. No one is there except for the CFO from World Cup qualifying. This is a blank slate. This is a chance to build this out properly. And for all the accomplishments that Herdman had coaching the national team, part of the national team manager's job is providing the grassroots, the development pathway through this country as well. Herdman was very focused on it early, but in order for him to do his job and help the team get to the World Cup, he solely focused really on the men's national team. Those two jobs, those are two separate jobs. They shouldn't just fall on the plate of one individual. We need people that are in charge, able to grow this game, grow the pathways to provide the national team with more resources and a national team manager. And the way that the hiring goes for the men's national team head coach, it's the general secretary that goes and recommends a head coach to the board of directors. But right now, there's not a general secretary without an interim tag on it.
That's right.
They need to get on that first. So before you're hiring a full-time manager, who's ever going to be that person that's going to be the CEO, essentially, of Canada Soccer, that person needs to be hired. And Jason DeVos is in the role right now. Personally, I think he's probably more suited for a technical role and maybe be that person that oversees development in this country, because there's few people better than that. But we need someone that can run Canada Soccer as a business and make sure that it's well-rounded and then go on and do that hire. So I still think, Andy, we're a while away until we actually know who that manager would be. And I hope that they don't rush it. I mean,
can't be too far away. They have a game in October.
But I think
that game, Yellow's going to take that.
Morrow can do that, and November.
Yeah. Against Japan. Okay. Then November is Nations League. So make sure that you get the right people in charge here, because long term, you need the right person to set the tone. Just like John Herdman was the right man for this job in 2018 onwards. Now it's time for someone else, and they have to get it right. But they have to get their house in order within Canada Soccer first. Some vision and some execution here.
You agree with that, Ollie? Because I think, a lot of people are antsy. They just want to know who's going to be named the next coach. Or do you agree that there's not a rush and you've got to get other things in order first?
This is my big concern, and I think a broadly optimistic outlook. This is the area where I'm a bit pessimistic, is like, I don't know what Canada Soccer plans to do next, right? Are they planning on appointing a permanent general secretary? Because they really need to lead this process. Otherwise, what we're doing here in terms of hiring, again, like I said, a program-defining head coach, one of the biggest appointments you'll ever make. So that is my big kind of area of concern, is just like, is there a bit of a leadership void right now at this federation? With all due respect to Jason DeVos, he's still got that interim tag on him. Is he the long-term guy? Or as we all said, are they going to need someone with a bit of a different profile and different experiences to lead this federation here through all of the things it's going through, including hiring this coach? So, but beyond that, like I firmly agree that I think there's going to be names that throw their name in the hat for this job that you might be surprised. Like I think going to co-hosting a World Cup in 3 years' time with the talent that's on this roster, a young up-and-coming rising roster, this is going to be an appealing job to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people who will be willing to cut through all the BS that has surrounded this program and focus much more on the football, which to me is tremendously exciting going through the next few years.
Well, of course. I mean, this is a team that will most likely qualify for Copa America. So you're going to be taking on massive nations in that competition. And of course, all roads lead to 2026 and a home World Cup. So I would see this being a very appealing job. But it's just very interesting as well, the type of coach that they can attract. I'll just keep going back to it, KJ, the type of coach they can also afford. And then, what kind of comes along with that, right?
I'm not worried about that.
I'm completely. Really so, I think that's the truth. I think ultimately, as I said, it's a very attractive job and they're a good bunch of people to coach. There's a tremendous amount of growth and progress and opportunity I see in core players. And I also would say this is that a lot of those young players who can be the core players, I think can now take more of a leadership role that they didn't get when under John Herdman. And John Herdman had a reason for that. And again, it's not a criticism, but John Herdman inherited, a team where he needed to get his senior players on board and build that, as he often would call it, the senior leadership team around him to help him and secure a lot of, trust and, success in that system. And some players who would maybe be arguably the most talented players weren't always given that voice. And I think now's the time to give them a bit more authority and let them lead going forward. I think that's a really, really important part going forward, that you don't hand the keys or the captain's armband right away to an Alphonso Davies, for example. But Alphonso Davies has been in arguably the best sporting culture of any player on this team for the last 4 or 5 years. He knows what it's like to be a leader. He knows what players are like around that area. And I think if you give him that ability to have more power, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised what we see with the results.
Well, the statement that was released today, KJ, just Alphonso Davies wishes Herdman the best. It doesn't sound like warm and fuzzy. Like what happened to Milan Borjan at the Gold Cup? I don't know. He just all of a sudden left, but he was playing the next week for his club side. Like there's been some loud whispers that everyone wasn't on the same page, that this brotherhood, I don't think it was player after player, but just in terms of needing more direction, it just seemed like things had gone kind of a little bit sideways. I don't know if you want to get into that anymore, KJ, but like that's just,
I do want to ask you this
things.
Before, if you do want to touch that, I do want to ask you this. Whoever comes on board, and Ollie, I'll start with you. What would be a change that you'd like to see this new coach make with a roster lineup? Like right out of the gate, I guess maybe with me, as I just wouldn't mind maybe seeing Dane St. Clair get more starts. Just saying. Or if Max Crepeau's ready to go. I'm just saying. But what would be maybe some lineup changes?
That's a good question. I don't know that there needs to be massive changes in terms of personnel. I think the goalkeeper will be one that they'll look at. I think Alphonso Davies' role is the biggest thing for me for any new coach coming in. They have to get that right. That's been a big problem over the past year for me is not finding the right way to get the best out of Alphonso, who is your best player. What I would just say on the manager is like, I'm totally open to seeing what kind of names are linked and maybe put their name in the hat. And if some of them come from abroad and from different places in the world, that's great. And I'm sure that they'll be properly considered. I wouldn't be afraid, though, of a Canadian coach who maybe on paper does not have the same resume as some of the international names that might be linked, because I think international management is a very different thing to the club game. I think knowledge of the country, the player pool, becomes increasingly important, familiarity with the game in this country. And you can just look back to the last World Cup at some of the names that were coaching and had success at that World Cup. Arnold with Australia, Moriyasu with Japan, Regragui obviously with Morocco. Even the World Cup winner, Scaloni, okay, he's had a fantastic playing career, but he's never been a senior manager. So I think the idea of appointing a Canadian coach who is up and coming, who has the right ideas, who has vision for where this national team can go, that for me could be a very appealing option, and one that I think has got to be strongly considered alongside what I'm sure will be some good names from elsewhere as well.
Well, who's going to
make that decision? Who's going to make that decision? That's what it comes down. That's what it comes down to. I can, obviously Bobby Smirniotis, his name, people, rightfully push that name out there. He was the runner-up, from what I'm told, Smirniotis agents and Toronto FC, they got to the point they were talking numbers. Like he was very much in consideration for the Toronto FC job. He was a runner-up to John Herdman there. And I'm sure there will be some interest around the national team program. I'll throw out some other names. Ronaldo Rueda, he's a name who's coached for big Colombia, Ecuador. He's had certain levels of success as well. His daughter just so happens to work for Toronto FC. There's that's a name that I think would be very much on the radar. And I can tell you, he did interview for the Canada job before John Herdman was named manager to the Canadian men's national team. What about other managers with some profile? What about a Jesse Marsh? I mean, Jesse Marsh's name is out there. He has experience in Montreal. I know Ollie doesn't like the Red Bull style of football, but what does Canada, what is their strength? Their strength is like pressing, get out and using that athleticism, playing on the front foot. There's a lot of intriguing names out there, and we'll see which ones come to the forefront. But I'll stress this, there's work to be done before you just go on and name a manager. That general secretary has to come first. You need to get the board, the executive, and the coaching staff all on the same page here. And if it's not, we're just going to continue to run into the same problems that we have over the last 14 months.
I'll just add this. We're in a different phase now in 2023 than we were in 2018. And I think this team now, more than ever, needs a coach and not necessarily a figurehead and a coach. Yes. And somebody who isn't in the headlines all the time, somebody that isn't always talking about the association and asking whether we're serious about winning a World Cup, but somebody who wants to get the best on X's and O's every single day about the team, because ultimately that's the most important thing. And I think that's the next step for this team, is that John Herdman is bang on. They have an unbelievably great opportunity to do really well at a World Cup. They are going to be hosting 3 group games now and not 2, which is another great opportunity as well to galvanize this nation. And when the World Cups come around, people talk about one thing: wins and losses. And that's ultimately why we're all here. Football first. And in between, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of self-serving. There's a lot of agendas. There's a lot of nonsense. But ultimately, if the sport's going to succeed, it's about on the pitch first. And that's ultimately that person's job. Come in, figure out a system. How can you make sure that we get better at the back? How can we get the best out of Alphonso Davies? Can we play Davies, Laren, David, and Tejan together? All these questions that a head coach is paid to do. That's what we need next, is outcomes and results on the field to take this team forward. And with everything else that's going on and everybody else talking about other things, let's get a manager who knows what he's coming in and the constraints that he's working under. Because it doesn't matter whether you're the richest man in the world or the poorest team in the world, people still got to work under constraints. Yeah. You still got to work under it. And everyone's got it. It doesn't matter whether you're Vincent Kompany at Burnley playing Man City. He's not coming in a press conference afterwards saying, we're not serious enough, we're not spending enough money. You just got to work within the means that you've got and carry it on.
Okay, KJ, just on that really quickly, about this, doom and gloom. When John Herdman left the women's team, we heard very similar things, and we heard that from women's players. Guess what? The next manager that came in helped them win the Olympic gold medal. And John helped set the tone, set the table. He deserves a lot of credit for that. But another manager got them over the hump. We see this in the club game. We see this in the national team game. And to your point you made earlier, KJ, look at the number of national team managers that were fired coming out of the World Cup, and some of them did have a level of success. It's just it's such a volatile. It's such a volatile job that a manager of a national team. I don't expect them to stay as long as they have.
What I would also say is that I think the depiction of Canada soccer and what it's like to be the head coach of one of these national teams is verging on a caricature at times in terms of the resources that are available. This federation over the past 2 years spent $50 million on its 2 national teams, which was an absolutely unprecedented amount for us in Canada. It was almost equivalent to like the previous 7 or 8 years combined, I think. That was probably too much. And we know the reasons why, to get to Qatar and COVID and things like that. And now it's catching up with them a little bit, and the belt is getting tightened as a result. But this idea that like it's, you're scrounging for every penny and no resources are being provided to you and there's no chance of competing. It's all ridiculous. And I think coming from, unfortunately, a lot of sources where people are maybe a little bit newer to reporting on the teams and the sport in this country than maybe others. But anyway.
Yeah, you know what? They're looking at all the comments too. Like, there are a lot of people who get it, and John Herdman does deserve his flowers for what he's been able to do with both these programs. Again, the women, finishing last at a 2011 World Cup and taking them to the 2012 Olympics, and they get that bronze in 2012 and 2016, and it was just very inspirational. And what they were able to accomplish on that massive stage really affected the game here on home soil, especially for young women. And then, of course, taking over the men. And we had the privilege of covering this incredible story. The men were doing things that they had never done before when it comes to even goals in a game and the amount of players getting hat tricks and wins in a single season, and Kyle Larin becoming the all-time goal scorer. Like, just everything was increasing, numbers increasing. Milan Borjan himself said that oftentimes when he was called to the national team, he would treat it like some sort of vacation because there wasn't this sense of seriousness oftentimes and pride. And Herdman helped to change that around, and he got them to the World Cup for the first time in over 30 years. We know all this. This is wonderful stuff. And people are also understanding that it was probably time to go. And there are a lot of people who do look at World Cup in Qatar. They do feel like Herdman brought the team as far as he could bring them. And it was shown at the World Cup. And then, KJ, you've mentioned the other results after that there is an understanding someone else needs to step in now, and let's see what they can do. But I do want to go back to Herdman because he's not gone. He's he's now the head coach of Toronto FC. So, I mean, the guy's still alive, right? For crying out loud. He's just taking another job. I don't want to talk about him like he's gone. Ollie, what would you say should be his first order of business? Again, remember, he's going to take over October 1st. So he's obviously going to do some sort of transition scouting, checking things out. I know. So Terry Dunfield, who is the interim head coach, he comes from the school of Herdman. He's been an assistant coach with him. So he comes from that school of motivation and playing movie clips to players. They brought in Pinball Clemens, who is an extraordinary motivational speaker as well, to talk to the Toronto FC players. We all know, and credit to Terry, at least he tried, that it has not resulted in any results whatsoever. And he comes from that school of Herdman. So Herdman's going to come in and do the same thing. Now, Terry's the pupil, Herdman's the master. But what do you think should be his first order of business to try and get some sort of life out of this team before the season ends?
Yeah, look, there's a lot. I think that there are things that I wouldn't call it his first order of business because it's going to happen over this winter in terms of building for next season. It's an absolutely massive off season for them again. They've got a ton to do. And you're right that like kind of the motivational side of it and the, getting people on board, that's not all of it. And it's not going to be enough. There's going to be a lot of different aspects of management that John Herdman is going to have to exhibit here to turn this club around. But I also, at the same time, I don't think that side of it is unimportant either. And I do think that is kind of where he has to start, is to both with the players and the staff and the fans and everyone around this club, he has to restore a sense of kind of hope for the future, right? And believing that that they're working towards something here and they're on a path that's worth going down. And that was where he started with the men's national team, obviously trying to have a bit of a culture reset in that dressing room. And now he's going to have to do the same thing with Toronto FC. I think there are often questions when, there were the questions there when John Herdman took the men's national team job, well, he's worked in the women's game. How are the men going to respond to this? Is it going to be a bit different? Is he going to get the same kind of buy-in? And he usually finds ways to get it. So I wouldn't bet against him in that regards. That I think is the first thing he has to do, is to get everyone on board, get everyone kind of believing that there's something in front of them here that's worth doing. And then comes the hard work, I think, of reassembling this roster, fixing long-standing issues when it comes to fitness and injuries and a bunch of other different things that I think you can list off that have held Toronto FC back over the past couple of years.
How are you feeling, KJ? What would you say would be the first order of business?
Maybe go move in to Lorenzo Insigne's basement and get to know him for a bit, because that might be really important. It's just an idea. I don't know if he's got a basement, but I'm sure he's got a big enough house to house John for a while.
I think so too.
Yeah, that might be really important because this is the issue that Toronto FC have, right? What they got right in 2014 by getting Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore, and Sebastian Javinko was that the highest paid players set the standard, and eventually, and they bought in and they all believed in each other, and they didn't all get along every single minute of the day, but there was a collective there belief that they know what it took to try and win back and get the team back to where they felt they belonged. And right now, the leaders at Toronto FC, from what I'm hearing, are not doing that. Right. So if you can't get them on board and you can't move them, then that's a big problem. So that's really probably one thing I think of. The other one I would think of is there's is that he is, as you alluded to, as many people have said here, he's a builder. And I think he now has to think about a lot of self-reflection and a lot of thinking about himself in terms of what has he done at the national team, where he has the time to build in between games, that needs to be able to, I think, a little bit more evolving into the club game where he's not going to have the time. Right. He's going to have the winter, but he's not going to have the time in between matches. He's not going to have the time to put together the 90-page decks or the presentations that he's going to have to figure out on a daily basis. And I think that's where the squad, the staff members who are coming with him, who we've seen announced leaving Canada Soccer, well, he'll have to rely on them a ton as well, because let's be honest, Gareth, it's a completely different job than what he's doing now. In many ways, I've said this for a long time. Jesse Marsh has said this. It's almost a different sport, club football to international football. So look, the skill set is very similar, but it's a very, very different kind of job that he's going to have when he had the national team.
John needs to do what he does best, and that is that starts tomorrow. He needs to have Insigne and Bernardeschi happy and on the field. And the reason is very simple. So both players can restore some of the value that they once had. So then they can go get the moves that they want away from Toronto FC, and Toronto FC can get rid of them without paying off these players to go away. That's what it is. Like Bernardeschi sulking, sitting on the bench, not playing, being suspended does not help his value if he wants to move. Lorenzo Insigne watching from wherever off injured or reported spats, like that does not get him a move away. It's playing on the field and producing and being the excellent players that they sometimes are. That's what's going to get them their move away from Toronto FC. And if John and Terry and whoever else can get them on board for the rest of the year and they play really well and finish the season strong, I think there's a better chance that they move on. If not, these are massive financial commitments that are tied to everything that Toronto FC does. Because it's not just a complete rebuild on the field that they need, guys. They need to shore up recruitment. They need to shore up their medical staff. They need to, like, every single pillar needs work. And all of it takes and will cost money and investment. And if you take away the investment, $60 million to Insigne a season and $6+ million over the next 3 years to Bernardeschi, it gives you a little bit more freedom to go out and make some of these critical moves to long-term success.
For sure, but like, isn't the interesting part of that, Wheels, that he's not starting until October the 1st?
Well,
so he's only going to have three games to coach these players. I doesn't suggest that he sees that as really a priority for him.
I've asked. That was the first question I've asked, and I asked multiple people, and no one's got back to me. What I think, and this is just what I think based upon accrued knowledge and what I've asked and what I've got back, I think that this is contractual. I think this might be sponsorship related. This might have more to do with the business of the sport rather than what's happening on the field. I'm sure that question will be asked tomorrow at the press conference, but I believe that this is a little bit more on the business side. What I will say, I'm a little bit surprised, as much as we're not surprised that Herdman is now the coach of Toronto FC. I was told it was 98% done 3 or 4 weeks ago, but then we've been in this holding pattern. Everything kind of went silent. And we thought that some of it might have to do with the financials, but then more and more you heard about whether or not Bill Manning was going to be allowed to make that decision. And the fact that it was announced today, where as recent as last night, you're kind of like, which direction is this going? It's a little surprising to me that poof, all of a sudden this came to be today, because they still think that there's a lot to be done off the field. It sounds like Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment want to hire a president that can oversee the Maple Leafs, the Raptors, and Toronto FC, something that they haven't had now for quite some time. It can't be Larry Tannenbaum. What's going on with him and the MLSE board right now? So there's other moves that need to be made off the field, but all of this costs. So I am surprised in the timing. I'm not surprised that he ended up taking the job.
I'll just add, you mentioned the press conference he's going to be in tomorrow. I really hope that that's a press conference for Toronto FC and not a recap of what's gone wrong with Canadian soccer. It's Toronto FC's day, and their season ticket holders have been put up with absolute nonsense and garbage for too long, and they spend far too much money and time, and they are of every right to be excited about a new hire, whether people think it's the right hire or not. They need something to be excited about. And when John Herdman is asked tomorrow, why did you take this job and leave the national team? What I would want to hear as a season ticket holder is what a wonderful opportunity and what a marvelous club it is. I don't want to hear the story that a lot of people are trying to put out there, and people are still putting in the chat here about the dysfunction of Canadian soccer. And this is just something I'm really, really passionate about. I love this sport and I love this country. And I think that there's a lot of people who want to tear it down. And the people who are investing their time, God bless you all. If you're spending an hour with us tonight, you love it as well, But it's the ones who aren't spending an hour with us tonight that are reading a headline or a prominent message on a major network or in a major newspaper tomorrow and just going, Canada soccer fails again. And it's those people who aren't buying tickets, and it's those organizations that are not sponsoring and spending the money that Canada soccer needs to take this network, to take this forward, this whole thing forward. And so I just hope that we can try and put an end to that nonsense that people are still trying to paint in the picture. Yes, of course, there's dysfunction. Yes, of course, there's a lot of work to be done. But this is simply football. This is a move by a coach whose job is complete, and he goes to move to another job, which is a big job. He's got a lot of work to do, but it can be a great job. And what a job he's got to have there. And that should be tomorrow's story, and the story for all people in football who care about the game in this country.
I'm excited. I'm excited for John, KJ, to be honest with you. Like, coming out of the Gold Cup, what was the line he said after it was all done? I think you were down there in Cincinnati. I think you talked to him, Ollie, that this felt like the old Canada, like getting his hands dirty and like building something from scratch. I think that this is going to reinvigorate John Herdman. I think it's going to be, I think this is a really good move for him, and he has an opportunity to get this ship back on track at Toronto FC. It ran its course at Canada Soccer, but Ollie, that comment stuck with me after the Gold Cup, and with all the other evidence and the things that we've been hearing over time. But I think this is a good opportunity. I think he'll be beaming tomorrow. I think John Herdman is very excited about this move. It's not about where he's leaving. I think it's about where he's going.
I mean, I'm excited, and I'm also a little nervous as somebody who even started covering Toronto FC back in 2008. I mean, you guys, a lot of us here are day oneers in covering this team. We know how passionate this fan base is. And I think there is excitement because we see what he's done with Canada soccer. But from what I'm also hearing, there's a lot of nerves because he doesn't have pro experience. Again, there's that day in and day out. And when this fan base gets upset, we've all seen how John Herdman can get a little prickly when he, coaches a few games every few months and then is scrutinized for the results. Well, what happens when you have to play a game every week? So I think he's going to have to dig deep inside himself and figure out also what kind of everyday coach he is when it comes to the pro game. And I think this is where a lot of TFC fans, that's what I'm getting from them, is they know what he's done for both the men and women's programs. And it's like, all right, this guy's done some really good things, but at the same time, it's, oh no, things can go sideways in a hurry. How would he react to that? That's, my question.
I don't know that is a huge concern to me. I know it will be for a lot of people, and I totally acknowledge that the club game is different and is going to require different things of him. But I also think he's not naive, and he'll know that, right? Like, I think he's going to be fully aware.
Knowing it and then standing on the sideline. Weren't we at the game together, Ollie, when Bob Bradley was booed? Like,
yeah, no, it's
a different ball game when it's like every single night and then suddenly you've lost 3 in a row. And that fan base, this is why we love them.
It is. And if you get yourself in a difficult situation and that reality hits you, it's tough and it's going to test him. There's no question about that. But I just think he is smart enough to know that, the methodology he applied as a national team coach is not going to be applicable to the club game. It's going to be different in terms of training, in terms of preparing the team for a game every week, as opposed to, a couple of games every few months. Like, I think he will have the ability and he has the staff around him to adapt to that and to work in a different way and kind of understand how he needs to work in order to have success in the club game. For me, the far bigger risk or the far bigger challenge for him is what he's inheriting at Toronto FC. Like, if he can't get either Insigne and Bernadeschi performing and on the same page as him, or alternatively out of the club, like, they might have already made their bed for the next year or two here because these guys are under contracts and that's not going to go anywhere, right? So that to me is the far bigger challenge for him, is just the situation that he has to either make work, which I have strong doubts as to whether anyone can, or get out of. And that comes with its own challenges, given the amount of money these guys are making and the reluctance maybe to give up those contracts and go somewhere else.
And money again, like Richie Larea didn't come back to Toronto because they couldn't afford him, gentlemen. So what is even that back line going to look like? What kind of money would they even have for that? So you're right. I think what he's inheriting is also a big thing. And that's why I go back to the very start of the show, where you want to sit here and say the resources weren't there from Canada Soccer. I'm wondering where they're going to come from, even with Toronto FC. Just
a quick one for me. Two things he's got in his favor. One, which is big in life for any business, he's got the benefit of the doubt factor right now because the fan base and the audience are aware of what he's done. And if he'd gone to I don't know, name a team, QPR or New Zealand or even that they would hang on a minute, 4 games, you get this guy out if it's not going well. Do you know what I mean? So he's got that benefit of the doubt factor. The second thing he's got is Major League Soccer and the quality is down, guys. And it's not that hard to be successful in MLS. They're allowing a ridiculous amount of teams into playoffs. It's not that competitive. And I think ultimately they spend a lot of money at TFC. And so, look, the roster right now is a disaster, as I said before. But, if he can stick around and get through it, then suddenly maybe you can find ways to be able to succeed in this. And if they can get a playoff game, then suddenly that's success right away in a turnaround right now. As I said, this is the bottom of the bottom right now, the bottom of the barrel. And hopefully for TFC fans, that's the bottom and there's no breaking of the ice and you're falling through it. But ultimately he's got a lot of things going for him. And I think we need to keep saying that this is a really, really big job, but it's a great job. And that comes with expectation and he should be ready for that.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up here. I guess just final thoughts, Ollie. I'll start with you at the top there. Whether you wanted to be on Herdman and TFC or whether you wanted to be on the vacancy with Canada Soccer, and how do you feel the next steps will be for the Federation?
Yeah, it's a really big moment. It's the closing of obviously a massive chapter for the men's national team. And I do have to say, I may not have agreed with every decision he's made or everything he says, every stance he's taken as Canada coach. But I am grateful for what John Herdman has given to this job. I don't think he can be questioned in terms of his commitment, in terms of his desire to be successful with both the women's and the men's national teams. And over 12 years, he leaves a tremendous legacy behind. So I think this was the right time for everyone, as we covered early on. I think this is the right decision for all concerned. And now we've got to move forward, which I think can be really exciting. But Herdman is going to, have left, obviously, a pretty remarkable legacy, I think, on what he's done for this program and football in Canada in general.
Wheels?
Yeah, it's been quite the ride. He leaves the Canadian men's national team as the most successful manager in men's Canadian soccer history for the national team. I mean, there was a lot of questions if we flash it back to when he left the women's team to join the men's team. A lot of naysayers, and based upon what was accomplished, he proved them wrong. He provided some wonderful moments for this country, some wonderful sound bites, some memories that I know that I'll carry with me over the course of my life, and probably you guys as well. Like getting to a World Cup for this program, it can't be overstated how much of a big deal that was. And this was the man that oversaw it. And it wasn't just that they made it there; it was how they made it there. And the players, of course, they deserve a huge amount of credit. But this was a job that he believed he could do, and he did it exceptionally well. Again, the last year hasn't been great. It's been regrettable in a lot of ways, but those memories will last a lifetime. And if people are going to underestimate him going into this job as well, and I'm sure that there will be people, then go ahead, because this person in John Herdman, that's what he's all about, trying to defy the critics. He's got that chip on his shoulder. He wants to go out and prove you wrong. And I'm sure he's going to do his utmost to make sure that this Toronto FC team is turned around. So I think at the end of the day, this move is a win-win for all parties involved. And we'll see if it plays out that way. It's easier to sit here today and say it's a win-win. We'll see what it looks like down the road.
Yeah, look, I would say forget about the critics. Spend less time caring what people think. That's what I would say. And just back your belief in what you can do. Ultimately, for far too long in this country, we underachieved. And then I would argue that that John Herdman allowed this country to overachieve for a long time. Now let's just achieve, right? Can we just start achieving? That would be good enough for me. I don't want any more underachieving. And part of his leadership style and being a great leader and his talks that he's often talked about leaving something better than you find it. So let's make sure that that's the case, and everyone plays a part in that. So as he leaves Canada Soccer today, let's make sure that we build on that and that people stop, trying to tear this organization apart and move forward, because we get to host the greatest tournament in the world in 3 years' time. And so let's make sure we're ready.
Yeah, obviously wishing John Herdman all the best, and especially being able to turn things around with Toronto FC. There are only 3 Canadian clubs in Major League Soccer. You want to be able, as a Canadian as well, to see all 3 thriving. Wouldn't it be great if he could turn things around there? And then we'll continue to keep our eye on Canada Soccer. What will they do in-house to get things in order to then finally hire a coach? And what can that coach do with this incredible roster? Next up for the men, as we know, will be against Japan on October 13th. Thank you to everybody who joined us on this impromptu live YouTube show here on One Soccer. Thanks for all the comments. That's Kristian Jack, Gareth Wheeler, Oliver Platt. I'm Andi Petrillo. We'll see you next time.